Victor Crane dropped a manila folder onto Nora Whitfield's desk so hard, the glass of water beside her laptop tipped and spilled across 7 months of her work. He didn't apologize. He said, "Sign it, or I take it to the board Monday, and you won't have a desk to sign anything on." Nora looked at the folder. Then she looked up at him. And she didn't sign it. That decision, 4 seconds of silence in a corner office overlooking the Atlantic, was about to cost her everything she had left of her father. It was also about to lead her straight to a man who'd once walked away from an empire of his own, for a reason no boardroom in America would ever understand. Comment your city below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this is your first time here, hit subscribe. Trust me, you don't want to miss what happens next. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, which Ethan always thought was the cruelest kind of day for bad news. Not a Monday when you're already bracing for the world. Not a Friday when at least you can collapse into the weekend. A Tuesday, ordinary, unsuspecting, dressed up like nothing was coming. He was standing at the kitchen sink when his phone buzzed against the counter. He ignored it. He was watching Lily eat cereal, making sure she actually finished it, instead of just moving the pieces around in circles the way she'd started doing lately. She was 7 years old, and she'd already developed a talent for creative avoidance that she definitely inherited from her mother. His chest tightened at that thought, the way it still did sometimes without warning. The phone buzzed again. "Dad," Lily said without looking up, "your phone's being annoying." "I know. You should answer it." "I'm watching you eat." She finally looked up, brown eyes steady and unimpressed. "I'm eating." "You're moving cereal." She sighed with the exhaustion of a 7-year-old who found her father deeply fundamentally unreasonable. She took an enormous spoonful just to prove a point. He smiled despite himself and picked up the phone. The number wasn't one he recognized, but the area code was Harrow Bay, the small coastal town 3 hours north, where he'd been contracted for a restoration project. He'd only been hired 2 weeks ago. The job wasn't supposed to start for another month. "Ethan Cole." A woman's voice. Precise, not warm, not cold, just controlled the way a person sounds when they've taught themselves to waste nothing, not even tone. "Speaking. This is Nora Whitfield. I'm the CEO of Whitfield Hospitality Group. Your firm was contracted to restore the Harrow Grand Estate." He already knew that. He'd signed the paperwork himself. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm moving the start date up. I need your team on site by Monday." He looked at the calendar pinned to the refrigerator. Lily's school play was Friday. Her dentist appointment was Thursday. His neighbor Diane had a doctor's appointment Monday morning and couldn't watch Lily before school. The whole delicate architecture of a single father's week stretched in front of him like a suspension bridge built from timing and hope. "That's 5 days from now," he said. "I'm aware. My contract specifies a 30-day notice for schedule changes." A pause. Brief, but he caught it. "Mr. Cole, I'll be honest with you. The estate is in worse shape than the initial inspection reported. I have investors arriving in 6 weeks for a preview event, and if that venue isn't operational, I lose them. All of them." He leaned against the counter and looked at Lily, who had finished her cereal and was now examining a scratch on the table with scientific focus. "I can have a team on site by Wednesday," he said. "Monday isn't possible." Another pause, longer this time. "Wednesday." "Wednesday morning, 7 a.m. She said, "Fine," like it was a concession she was cataloging for later, and then she hung up. Ethan set the phone down and looked at Lily. "You need a bath before school." "I took one yesterday." "That was Sunday. Today is Tuesday. So that's 2 days." "That's 2 days too many." She slid off the chair with the slow drama of someone being asked to climb a mountain, and he followed her upstairs to make sure she actually turned the water on. Chud. He didn't think much about Nora Whitfield until Wednesday morning, when he pulled his truck through the iron gates of the Harrow Grand Estate and saw her standing on the front steps. She was already there when he arrived at 6:58, 2 minutes before 7. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and holding a clipboard, and looking at the roofline of the main building with the expression of someone trying to determine whether a patient was already dead. She heard his truck and turned. He'd been expecting someone older. The voice had sounded older, or maybe just more experienced than her face suggested. She was somewhere in her late 30s. Dark hair pulled back. Cheekbones, sharp eyes the color of weathered sea glass. She wasn't beautiful the way magazines would have said she was beautiful. She was arresting. She looked like a person who had decided at some point to be completely unignorable. He got out of the truck and extended his hand. "Mr. Cole." She shook it once firm, businesslike. "Miss Whitfield." "Nora is fine." She looked back at the building. "The east wing roof is worse than the report said. I went up there myself Monday morning. You went on the roof. I needed to see it." He glanced at her shoes. Good leather flat heel, not what you'd call roof climbing footwear, but not ridiculous either. "You should have waited for a professional." She looked at him sideways. "Are you lecturing me about safety on my own property, Mr. Cole? I'm noting that if you'd fallen through the east wing roof, I'd have shown up Wednesday to a different kind of job." Something crossed her face, not quite a smile, but the shadow of one, like a smile's cousin, who was less publicly demonstrative. "The east wing is the priority. I also need the garden pavilion structurally sound within 3 weeks. The ballroom by week 5. He pulled out his own clipboard. "Walk me through what you need." They spent the next hour walking the property. He asked questions. She answered them. He made notes. She corrected 2 of them with details she'd evidently memorized, measurements and dates and structural specifications, which told him she'd done her homework in a way most clients didn't bother to do. Most clients wanted results and didn't care about process. She wanted to understand every step. He respected that, even when it was inconvenient. The estate was extraordinary in the way that old things that have been neglected for too long still manage to be extraordinary. The bones were magnificent. The decay was heartbreaking. Original hardwood floors buried under water damage. Plaster moldings intact in rooms where the ceiling had partially collapsed. A ballroom that must have hosted hundreds of celebrations now sitting silent and half-dark, smelling of damp and time. "Your family built this?" he asked, standing in the ballroom doorway. "My grandfather, in 1948. She stopped beside him. "He built it for my grandmother. She wanted a place where people could fall in love." He looked at the peeling wallpaper, the broken chandelier sitting in pieces on a drop cloth, the grand windows clouded with grime. "It's a good place for it." She looked at him surprised. "It's a disaster." "It's also still standing. After everything it's been through, it's still standing." He tapped the doorframe. "That means something." She studied him for a moment with those sea glass eyes. Then she wrote something on her clipboard and moved on. He noticed things about her over the next 2 weeks. She was always there before his crew arrived, and she was always there after they left. Twice, he stayed late to finish measurements and found her at a folding table in the hallway, laptop, open phone pressed to her ear, talking to someone about projected revenue and adjusted timelines with the focused intensity of a surgeon mid-operation. She didn't ask for help. She didn't complain. She moved through problems like water moves through rock, not dramatically, just constantly. Once he found her trying to lift a piece of fallen beam by herself in her blazer, because apparently she'd decided it needed to be moved and no one else was nearby. "Stop," he said. She didn't stop. "I've almost got it. You're going to throw your back out, and then I'll have to feel responsible, and I really don't need that kind of guilt." He took the other end. "On 3. They moved it together. She didn't say thank you right away. She set it down, straightened up, and said, "My assistant called it ridiculous that I was here on a Thursday evening moving construction debris." Your assistant sounds smart. "She's insufferable." But the tone was fond. "She's been with me for 4 years. She's the only person who tells me when I'm being an idiot." "What does she say about tonight?" "She said, and I quote, 'Nora, you are not a forklift.'" He laughed. It surprised him he didn't always see it coming when something was genuinely funny anymore. Life had a way of flattening your sense of humor if you weren't careful. She looked at him when he laughed. Not startled exactly, more like she was recording something. "You have a daughter," she said. It wasn't a question. She'd seen the car seat he hadn't removed from his truck yet, and the drawing Lily had taped to his toolbox. A crayon house pink door, a cat they didn't actually own. Lily. She's 7. Is she like you? He thought about it honestly, the way he always did when someone asked him something real. She's braver than me, funnier than me. She's like her mother. He kept his voice steady. Her mother passed when she was 2. Nora was quiet for a moment. I'm sorry, she said. Not the hollow version of those words, the actual version. Yeah, he said, because there wasn't anything better to say, and he'd stopped pretending there was. The trouble started on a Friday afternoon 14 days into the job. A black car with tinted windows came through the gate, and from it emerged a man who looked like he'd been specifically designed by a committee to inspire mistrust. Victor Crane was somewhere between 50 and ageless, the kind of man who wore his wealth like armor and his contempt like a fragrance. He had silver hair, a custom suit, and a handshake that told you he'd calculated exactly how hard to grip. Ethan was on a ladder near the East Wing entrance when the car arrived. He watched Victor Crane walk straight past 2 of his workers without acknowledging them and head up the front steps. He thought nothing of it. Then he heard Nora's voice through the open window above him, and the particular quality of it, controlled but tight, like a rope pulled to its last strand, made him pay attention. The evaluation timeline was agreed upon, Victor. Timelines change, Nora. That's the nature of business, which with respect is something you're still learning. Ethan kept working. He wasn't eavesdropping. He was just on a ladder. This estate generates 40% of our total event revenue in peak season. The figures you sent the board were optimistic. My analysts have reviewed them. Your analysts reviewed projections I hadn't finalized, because you didn't share the finalized ones. Victor's voice was smooth, almost kind, which was somehow worse than if it had been hostile. The board is concerned, Nora. They're concerned that you're emotionally attached to this property in ways that compromise your judgment. Your father built this place. We understand that. But that's exactly why. My father ran this company for 30 years. Her voice was still controlled. It cost her something. I've been CEO for 8 months. 8 months isn't enough time to evaluate a leadership transition. It's enough time to see patterns. A pause. What patterns? She said. That you're more concerned with preserving the past than building the future. Ethan came down from the ladder slowly, deliberately, and moved his tools to the far side of the building. He wasn't going to hear anything else. It wasn't his business. But he thought about her voice, that tight, fraying quality, for the rest of the afternoon. That evening, almost everyone had gone home. One of his crew, Danny, was finishing up measurements in the ballroom. Ethan was reviewing his schedule notes at the folding table in the main hallway. He heard footsteps and looked up. Nora was walking toward him, looking like someone who'd just survived something. The blazer was gone. Her sleeves were rolled up. She was carrying 2 paper cups of coffee, which he was almost certain was the first time he'd ever seen her carrying something that wasn't a clipboard or a phone. She set 1 cup down in front of him without asking if he wanted it. He picked it up. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She sat down in the chair across from him. I wanted coffee. You looked like you could use some. It's not a complex situation. He drank it. It was good coffee, which meant she hadn't gotten it from the machine in the estate's dusty kitchen. She'd driven somewhere or sent someone. Victor Crane, he said. She looked at him sharply. You heard. I was on a ladder. I wasn't listening on purpose. She was quiet for a moment. Then she decided something visibly and said, He's a major shareholder. He joined the board 18 months ago. My father didn't like him. Smart man, your father. Victor wants to sell the estate to a corporate hospitality chain. He believes the company's future is in mass-market hotels, not boutique luxury events. She wrapped both hands around her cup. He might be right about the industry direction. He's absolutely wrong about this property. Why? She looked at him a little surprised, like most people didn't ask her that. Because what this place does can't be replicated by a chain. People come here for the history, for the feeling that something real happened in these rooms, that people loved each other here, that it meant something. You can't franchise that." She paused. "That probably sounds sentimental." "It sounds accurate," Ethan said. "I've worked on properties all over the country. The ones that survive are the ones with a story. The ones people drive 4 hours to reach because there's no substitute." She studied him. "You say that like someone who's worked in this industry seriously." "I did. Years ago." "What happened?" He looked at his coffee cup. "Lily happened. And Sarah." He was quiet for a moment. "When my wife got sick, I was in the middle of designing 3 venues simultaneously. I was traveling constantly. She handled everything, appointments, decisions, the pregnancy, while I was in different cities. After she died, I thought about what Lily would remember about her father." He set the cup down. "I didn't want her to remember that I was always somewhere else." Nora was very still. "So you gave it up?" "I gave up the version of it that cost too much." She looked at him for a long moment, and he had the strange sense of being seen, not evaluated, not categorized, but actually seen the way a person sometimes catches their reflection unexpectedly and finds it more honest than they were prepared for. "I was engaged," she said suddenly, like she'd decided to match him. 5 years ago. His name was Jonathan, and he was beautiful and brilliant and completely empty, which I was too busy to notice until it was too late. She said it without self-pity, just the flat accuracy of someone recounting weather. 3 weeks before the wedding, he called it off. He'd been offered a partnership in Singapore. He chose it. 3 weeks before the wedding, Ethan repeated. The invitations were already out. The flowers were ordered. My dress was hanging in my childhood bedroom. She took a long drink of coffee. "The funny thing is, I'd been so busy managing the wedding, I never asked myself if I was actually happy." "Were you?" She thought about it for a moment in a way that felt real, not performed. "I don't know. I thought I was supposed to be. I'd done everything right, career right, partner right, timeline, and then it all stopped, and I realized I'd been building a life for an audience I'd imagined." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know that feeling." "Which part?" "The part where you realize you've been doing everything for a version of yourself you invented when you were 22. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, but opening the way a door swings when the latch finally gives. Danny appeared in the hallway with his bag. "I'm heading out, Mr. Cole. Same time tomorrow." 7 sharp, Ethan said. Danny gave a small wave, nodded at Nora, and left. The front door closed behind him. The hallway was very quiet. "You should eat something," Ethan said. She blinked. "What? You haven't eaten since this morning. I haven't seen you eat anything since I got here at 7, and it's now." He checked his watch. 6:45. "I ate lunch." "When?" She opened her mouth, closed it. "Exactly," he said. He reached into his bag and produced a granola bar, with the resigned air of a man who had spent 7 years persuading someone to eat regularly. She looked at it. "A granola bar. It's the good kind. Lily approves of this brand, and she is my quality control department." Nora took the granola bar. She didn't quite smile, but there it was again, that shadow of one, the cousin who kept showing up. "You carry snacks for your daughter in your work bag." "I carry snacks because Lily forgot her lunch twice, and I had to make emergency granola bar decisions, and now it's a habit." She opened the granola bar. "That's either very organized or very sad." "It's very Dad," he said. And this time, the smile was not a shadow. It was the actual thing, brief and unguarded, and it changed her face entirely. Made her look for just a moment like someone who'd set down a very heavy thing they'd been carrying so long they'd forgotten it had weight. 3 days later, Ethan was working alone in the garden pavilion when he heard her outside organizing a walkthrough with a florist for the upcoming preview event. She was extraordinary at it. That was the thing he couldn't stop noticing. She moved through the logistics of a complicated event, the way a conductor moves through a symphony. Everything timed, everything considered, every potential problem anticipated and routed around before it could become actual. She spent 40 minutes with the florist going through layouts and contingency plans and delivery windows. She knew the exact sunrise angle in July, which would affect where the ceremony arch needed to stand. She knew the drainage situation in the east garden after heavy rain, and had already arranged alternative paving. She walked the florist through 3 different scenarios with such precise detail that the woman looked slightly dizzy by the end. When the florist finally left, Nora stood alone in the garden for a moment, looking at the bare pavilion frame, and Ethan watched her let out a long, slow breath. He leaned against the pavilion doorway. "You know," he said, "you'd make a great bride someday." She turned, and her expression was somewhere between amused and startled. "What? You already know everything about weddings. You know florals, timing, logistics, venue, layout, weather variables." He gestured broadly. "You've basically planned your own wedding 15 times. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said very evenly, with the quietest version of a smile he'd ever seen, "I would need a groom for that." He laughed. She laughed too soft and surprised, like she'd forgotten she could. The afternoon light was sitting long and gold in the garden, and somewhere in the main building someone was using a drill, and the old estate smelled like sawdust and sea air, and nothing significant happened. Except that Ethan Cole, standing in a doorway, laughing with a woman who'd just dropped her armor for 30 seconds, felt something he hadn't felt in 7 years. Not love. Not yet. Something quieter and more dangerous. The specific feeling of wanting to stay. He didn't act on it. He wasn't built that way. He didn't lean into things without understanding them. First, didn't let feelings run ahead of thought. He'd had enough of that in his 20s, that reckless forward momentum, and he'd learned eventually that real things were built slowly or not at all. So he did what he always did. He went home. He picked Lily up from school, and she had glitter in her hair from an art project and a drawing of what she claimed was a horse, but which bore a closer resemblance to a lamp, and she talked for 20 straight minutes about her friend Cassie's birthday party while he made grilled cheese and cut the crusts off because some battles weren't worth fighting. After dinner, she sat at the kitchen table, working on a school project, a timeline of American history, and he helped her find pictures and dates while the evening settled around them quiet and ordinary and exactly right. Lily looked up at him while he was cutting out a photograph of the moon landing. "Dad? Do you ever miss having a girlfriend?" He looked up. She was watching him with the steady, unnerving focus she'd inherited from whoever had invented truth. "I heard Mrs. Diane telling Mrs. Park that you should meet someone. Mrs. Diane should mind her own business. She said you've been alone for a long time." He set down the scissors. "I have you." "I know, but I mean someone for you." She considered this with 7-year-old seriousness. "Like a lady friend." A lady friend. That's what Mrs. Diane called it. She's pretty old, so I think that's what old people say. He managed just barely not to laugh. "I'm fine, Lil." She looked at him for a long moment, the way she sometimes did. That measuring look that felt too old for her face, that had been there since she was 3, like she'd arrived in the world already knowing the important things. "Okay," she said, and went back to her timeline. But she said it the way a person says okay, when they don't entirely believe you. And he lay awake longer than usual that night, looking at the ceiling of the room he'd slept in alone for 5 years, thinking about a woman who stood in an empty garden and said, "I would need a groom for that." Like she was only half joking. It was Lily who broke the equilibrium, as she so often did, without knowing she was doing it. The school project was due Friday. It was Wednesday evening. She needed images, specific images of historical architecture, because her timeline section was on buildings that shaped American history. Ethan's laptop was at the job site. His phone battery was dead. He drove back to the estate to retrieve the laptop before the deadline. He didn't call ahead. He walked through the side entrance that his team used, the one that was always unlocked during the project phase, and he heard it immediately 1 floor above him in the East Wing corridor. Crying. Not loud. Not dramatic. The specific sound of someone crying quietly because they didn't believe anyone could hear. He stood very still. He shouldn't go up. It was her property, her privacy, and whatever was happening had nothing to do with him. He went up. She was sitting on the floor of the East Wing hallway back against the wall, knees drawn up, face in her hands. Her phone was on the floor beside her screen, lit with a message thread he couldn't read. She heard him and looked up. Her eyes were red. She didn't say anything. He sat down on the floor across the hall from her. She said nothing. He said nothing. After a while, she said, "He's going to call an emergency board meeting. Victor, he has enough proxies. He can remove me as CEO without a full board majority." Her voice was level now, but hollow. "It would have to be challenged in court, but that takes time, and in the meantime, a leadership vacuum." She stopped. "My father trusted this company to me. He spent 30 years building it, and I'm going to lose it in 8 months." Ethan looked at his hands. "What does your attorney say?" "That we have grounds but not certainty." "What does your assistant say?" She almost smiled. "That Victor is a manipulative parasite, and we should destroy him creatively." "I like your assistant." "She's completely right." She leaned her head back against the wall. "The problem is, I've been so focused on the restoration that I haven't built enough board relationships. I should have spent the last 8 months in those offices having those dinners doing the politics. Instead, I was here, picking up beams." She looked at him. That was probably a mistake, or it was what the estate needed. "The estate doesn't vote, Ethan." He looked at her. She almost never used his first name. It landed differently than he'd expected. "No," he agreed, "but the estate is evidence. What we're doing here, what you're building, that's evidence of exactly what you said you could do. You told the board this property was worth saving. In 6 weeks they're going to walk through it and see that you were right." She was quiet for a long moment. "Victor's going to attack before the 6 weeks are up. Then we finish faster." She looked at him steadily. "You can't guarantee that." "I can guarantee my team will work like it's the most important job we've ever done." He held her gaze. "Because you know what it might actually be." Something moved through her expression, not hope exactly, but the precursor to it. The moment before hope arrives, when you realize you might be able to believe in something again. She looked away first. "Why do you care about this?" He thought about it honestly, the way he always did. "Because it's a place where people fell in love," he said. "Your grandfather built it for your grandmother so that love could happen here. That's worth preserving." She didn't answer for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and stood up. "I'll have my team pull the preliminary restoration progress reports for the board package." "Good. I need updated cost-benefit analysis on the pavilion." "I'll have Danny put it together tomorrow." She looked at him standing there in the half-dark of the East Wing corridor, where the ceiling had half fallen and the walls still showed the bones of something magnificent. "Why did you come back tonight?" "Lily's school project," he said. "She needs the laptop." Nora Whitfield looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I hope she gets a good grade." He got his laptop. He went home. Lily worked until 10 o'clock and fell asleep at the kitchen table with her history timeline spread around her, and he carried her to bed without waking her up, the way he'd done 100 times, and he stood in her doorway for a moment, looking at her small face in the dark. I would need a groom for that. He closed Lily's door softly and went to bed. He thought it was a simple thing that evening. He had no idea what was already moving toward them. The estate had stood for 70 years through storms and seasons, and all the ordinary endings that accumulate in old buildings. It had held celebrations and grief and the specific silence that follows both. It had been waiting maybe for someone to come along who understood what it was for. What Ethan Cole didn't know yet, what he couldn't have known, standing in Lily's doorway that Wednesday night, was that 3 things were already in motion that would change everything. Victor Crane had already made his move. The board meeting was already scheduled. And someone somewhere in the company's financial records had already left a door open that was about to break wide. The morning after Ethan found Nora sitting on the floor of the East Wing corridor, he arrived at the estate at 6:45, and she was already there. She was standing at the folding table in the main hallway with 3 stacks of folders arranged in front of her, and a coffee that had clearly gone cold an hour ago, and she was on the phone with someone who was talking fast enough that Ethan could hear the tinny urgency of it from across the room. She didn't look up when he walked in. She held up one finger, not dismissive, just precise, and he nodded and went to find Danny. Danny was in the East Wing with 2 other crew members. Marcus and Pete already pulling measurements and comparing them against the revised timeline Ethan had put together the night before, after Lily fell asleep. Good crew. They worked without needing their hands held, which was the only kind of crew Ethan had ever been able to tolerate. "We need the pavilion frame reinforced by end of week," Ethan told Danny. "No exceptions." Danny looked at the timeline. "That's tight. I know it's tight. Marcus's brother could come in Thursday. He's done structural work before." "Call him," Ethan said. "Tell him I'll pay overtime." Danny nodded and went back to his measurements. Marcus looked up from the corner. "Boss, she okay?" Ethan looked at him. "What?" "Ms. Whitfield. She was here when I pulled up this morning, 6:15. She was just standing outside looking at the roof line." Marcus shrugged. "Looked like someone who hadn't slept. Mind your measurements, Marcus." "Yes, sir." Ethan went back to the hallway. Nora had ended her call and was writing something on a legal pad in handwriting so small and compressed it looked like code. "Your coffee's cold," he said. "I know." He picked it up, carried it to the estate kitchen, emptied it into the sink, and poured fresh from the thermos his crew kept running all day. He brought it back and set it down beside her. She looked at it. Then at him. "You don't have to do that." "I know I don't have to," he said, using her own words back at her. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close. She picked up the coffee. "Victor's attorney contacted our board liaison this morning. 6 a.m. 6 a.m.? He doesn't sleep, apparently. Or he wanted me to know he'd been working while I was—" She stopped, decided something. "The emergency meeting is being requested for 2 weeks from Friday. That's 4 days before our investor preview." Ethan sat down across from her. "He's timing it deliberately." "Of course he is. If the board votes to remove me before the preview either collapses or it happens under interim leadership and the investors see chaos instead of competence." She set the coffee down. "It's clean. I have to give him that. It's a very clean move. Can your attorney block the meeting? Delay it maybe, not block it." She looked at her legal pad. "I need 12 board votes to survive a removal motion. I currently have 7. I'm certain of 2. I'm probably certain of. And 4 who go wherever the wind is blowing. What does Victor have? 7 certain, possibly 8. She said it the way you say things you've already made peace with, not dramatically, just factually. The swing votes are what matter. James Calloway, Patricia Sung, Robert DeLeon, and Margaret Tull. Margaret is 81 years old and has been on the board since my father founded the company. She's the one I need most." "What does Margaret care about?" Nora looked at him. "What do you mean? You said the swing votes go wherever the wind blows. That means they're not ideological, they're responsive. So what does Margaret respond to?" She was quiet for a moment, thinking. "She cares about legacy. She was my father's oldest friend on the board. She believed in what this company was supposed to stand for, hospitality as a craft, not just a product." "Then show her the estate." "She's in her 80s. She doesn't travel. Bring the estate to her." He leaned forward. "Progress photos, material samples. The cost-benefit projections in a format that tells a story, not just a spreadsheet. Show her what this place looked like 6 weeks ago, and what it looks like now, and what it's going to look like in 2 weeks." He paused. "Show her that you're building exactly what your father built." Nora stared at him. "You know what you're doing," she said slowly. "You've done this before, not just restoration work." He picked up his own coffee. "I know how to make a case for a property." "That's not what I mean." She was watching him with that focused, measuring look. Victor told the board you were just a local contractor. He used that word just. She let that sit for a moment. Who were you before Ethan? He was quiet. Coal venues, she said. It wasn't a question. She'd figured it out or looked it up or both. Coal venues designed the Harrington in Charleston, the Bellamy Estate in Savannah, the Morrison Grand in San Francisco. They were one of the top 5 luxury event venue development firms in the country. She paused. Until 8 years ago when they went quiet. The principals split. The lead designer disappeared. He looked at his coffee cup. Is that what the internet says? That's what my assistant found at 2 a.m. when she couldn't sleep and started researching you because she said, and I quote, "Something about that man is not what it looks like on paper." Nora's voice was even. She's right about most things. I know what I walked away from, he said. I'm not judging you for walking away. I know you're not. He set the cup down. I walked away because I had to, and I don't regret it, but I didn't forget what I know. He looked at her directly. And what I know is that this estate is worth more than whatever number Victor Crane put in his analysis. Significantly more. And I can prove that to your board in language they'll understand. Nora was very still. Why? She said. Because it's true. That's not what I mean. He knew what she meant. He chose to answer the surface version because the real answer required more honesty than he was ready to give her in a hallway at 7 in the morning. Because your grandfather built something worth fighting for, and you're the right person to fight for it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her legal pad and wrote something at the top of a fresh page. I'm going to need everything you have. Comparable property valuations, projected revenue under full restoration, development cost analysis, historical significance, documentation. I'll have it by Monday. She looked up. That's 3 days. I know how many days Monday is. She studied him. You're a very strange contractor. You're a very strange CEO, he said. We'll get along fine. And there it was again, that smile, the real one. The one that arrived without warning and changed everything about her face. She looked away before it fully landed, but he saw it. He went back to work. The day was long and loud and physical the way he liked days to be. There was no room for overthinking when you were solving structural problems that required your full attention. The pavilion frame needed 2 new support beams, and the original decorative ironwork had to be cataloged before any of it could be moved. Marcus's brother Carl showed up at noon and proved immediately worth whatever overtime Ethan had promised him. Pete found a section of original mosaic tile under 3 layers of linoleum in the ballroom entrance and nearly knocked something over in his excitement about it. We preserve it, Ethan said, crouching to look at it. Blues and creams, and a small repeating pattern of sea glass shapes, exactly what you'd expect from 1948 coastal craftsmanship. Work around it. Don't touch it until I've documented it. It's beautiful, Pete said. Yes, it is. Ethan stood. Which is what I need you to remember when it slows you down. By 4 in the afternoon, he'd taken 47 progress photographs and sent them to his own email for the board presentation package. By 5, he'd called 2 colleagues from his former life, men he still trusted, men who owed him nothing, but answered anyway because that's what the old relationships were worth, and asked them for comparable property valuations from the last 3 years. At 5:45, he was loading the truck when Nora came out the front door with her blazer over her arm and her phone in her hand, and she stopped at the top of the steps. My assistant wants to meet you, she said. Your assistant who researched me at 2 in the morning. Her name is Diana. She says if you're going to help build the board presentation, she needs to talk to you directly. Nora looked at him steadily. She doesn't say that to many people. When? Tomorrow morning, here, 8 o'clock. She's driving down from the city. He thought about Lily's school schedule. Drop-off was at 8:15. If he left the house at 7:30, he could drop Lily and be here by 8:15, maybe 8:20, if the light at Mariners Road was red, which it usually was on Thursdays. 8:15, he said. Nora nodded. I'll tell her. He pulled out of the gate and drove the 3 hours home on coastal roads with the windows down, thinking about board presentations and comparable property valuations, and the look on Nora Whitfield's face when she realized he was more than what she'd hired. He pulled into his driveway at 8:47. Diane, from next door, was sitting on his porch steps with Lily, who was mid-story about something that involved elaborate hand gestures. "She's been fed," Diane said, standing. "Spaghetti. She ate 2 bowls." "Of course she did." Ethan ruffled Lily's hair. "Thank you, Di." Diane looked at him with the specific expression she'd been perfecting for 4 years, the one that said she had opinions about his life that she was generously not sharing. "Long day. Long week. The job going okay?" "It's going." Diane nodded. She patted Lily on the head and walked across the yard to her own house, and Lily immediately took Ethan's hand and started pulling him toward the front door while resuming the story mid-sentence. Something about Cassie and a disagreement about whether a horse could technically be a best friend, or if that was reserved for humans. "I think a horse can be a best friend," Ethan said seriously, unlocking the door. "That's what I said." Lily let go of his hand and went straight to the kitchen. "I want ice cream." "You had 2 bowls of spaghetti." "That was dinner. Ice cream is dessert. They're different categories." He gave her ice cream because it was a Thursday, and some arguments weren't worth the energy. She sat at the kitchen table eating it and watching him make himself a sandwich, and he thought about what she'd asked him 2 nights ago. "Do you ever miss having a girlfriend?" He thought about the way Nora had said his name in the East Wing hallway. Ethan. The way it sounded different than he'd expected. "Dad?" Lily said. You're making a weird face." "I'm making a sandwich face." "You're making a thinking about something face. It's different." He looked at her. "Are you always going to be this observant?" "Probably," she said. "Mrs. Diane says I have emotional intel." She paused, working through the word. "Emotional intelligence." "She's right. She also says you need to get out more." Lily delivered this with perfect neutrality, as if she were reporting weather. "I didn't tell her I agreed." He sat down across from her. "Do you agree?" She looked at him with those steady brown eyes, her mother's eyes in shape and color, but something distinctly her own in the quality of them. "I think you're happy," she said carefully. "But I think you could be more happy. Those are different things, too." He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah," he said. "They are." She finished her ice cream and went to bed without being asked, which was unusual enough that he checked her forehead for fever. She was fine. She just kissed him on the cheek and said good night and disappeared upstairs, and he stood in the kitchen for a long time doing nothing in particular. He was in bed by 10 and awake by 2, and he lay there in the dark, going through the board presentation structure in his head, organizing it the way he used to organize proposals. Leading with emotional resonance, building to financial argument, closing with undeniable data. He knew how to do this. He'd done it 100 times. The question was whether he could do it in a way that felt like Nora's story and not his own. It had to be her story. Her father's estate, her family's legacy, her vision for what the company could be. His knowledge was the tool. Her truth was the argument. He fell back asleep around 4 and dreamed about nothing he could remember. Diana, Nora's assistant, was exactly what he'd expected, and nothing like what he'd pictured. She was somewhere in her late 30s, small and quick-moving, with cropped natural hair and reading glasses she wore on her head until she needed them, which was constantly. She had the specific energy of someone who had decided that life was too short for inefficiency and was enforcing that decision aggressively. She shook Ethan's hand at 8:16 in the main hallway and said, "I read everything about coal venues last night. The Harrington profile in Architectural Digest, the Morrison Grand Retrospective, the piece about the Bellamy in Southern Living." She looked at him with her reading glasses still on her head. "You have very good taste for someone who currently drives a truck with a cracked windshield." "I've been meaning to get that fixed," Ethan said. "The Bellamy piece said you were the only designer who ever convinced the Beaumont family to restore the original ballroom rather than modernize it. You made the case in 20 minutes at a site visit." 23 minutes. The article said 20. The article was wrong. She looked at Nora. I like him. She pulled a laptop from her bag and sat down at the folding table. Okay, here's what we're working with. Victor submitted his board memo yesterday. I got a copy from James Calloway's office because James Calloway has known me for 4 years and trusts me more than he trusts Victor, which is the only edge we have with him right now. She opened the laptop and turned it to face them. Ethan leaned in to read it. Victor's memo was professional, thorough, and deeply dishonest in ways that only became visible if you knew what to look for. It cited restoration cost projections that were inflated by at least 40%. It cited projected event revenue figures that compared the estate to inland properties without accounting for the coastal premium. It described the current restoration progress as preliminary and uncertain, based on a site inspection Victor had apparently conducted or claimed to have conducted without anyone from Nora's team present. He walked the property, Nora said, without telling me. When? Ethan asked. According to this memo 10 days ago. Her voice was quiet and precise and very controlled. On a Tuesday. My crew was here on Tuesday. Ethan thought back. Tuesday had been a full crew day, his team in the East Wing and the pavilion. He tried to remember if any unfamiliar cars had come through the gate. He thought he might have seen a dark sedan parked near the access road around noon, but he'd assumed it was a delivery vehicle. He walked it and wrote a report without talking to anyone on the ground, Ethan said. He wrote a report designed to look like an independent assessment, Diana said, which he'll present to the board as objective. She took her glasses from her head and put them on and looked at the screen. The cost projections in here are based on a baseline comparable he's citing from a property in rural Ohio, which is wrong, Ethan said flatly. Coastal restoration has a completely different cost structure. Labor pools, material transport, salt air corrosion factors, building code variations. You can't compare this estate to a landlocked property. Any appraiser worth anything knows that. Victor's appraiser was Anderson Associates, Diana said. Ethan looked at her. Mitchell Anderson. You know him. I know his work. He thought carefully about how to say the next part. He does accurate work for clients who want accurate results. He does accommodating work for clients who want specific numbers. He paused. Victor got accommodating work. Diana looked at Nora. Can we prove that? Not directly, Ethan said. But I can produce a counter-assessment from 3 independent sources with coastal restoration expertise that will make Anderson's numbers look like what they are. He straightened up. I have 2 colleagues I called yesterday who are already pulling comparables. I need a third, and I know exactly who to call. How long? Nora asked. 10 days, which gives us 4 days before the board meeting. Nora and Diana looked at each other. Something passed between them, the specific shorthand of 2 people who have worked closely enough together that they communicate in glances. Do it, Nora said. Diana started typing. I'll draft the counterboard memo. Ethan, I need everything you pull formatted as supporting exhibits numbered and labeled cleanly. The board members who are swingable are detail-oriented. Margaret Tull reads every word of every document she receives. Robert DeLeon will want the financials on a single page with a clear comparison column. I can do that, Ethan said. I know you can. Diana looked at him over her glasses. I'm saying it because I need you to understand that I'm the one who will be putting this package together at 11 p.m. the night before it's due, and I need your exhibits to not give me a crisis. No crises, he said. Good. She looked back at her laptop. Now, the other issue. Nora went still. Ethan looked at Diana. What other issue? Diana glanced at Nora, who gave a small nod. Diana took her glasses off and set them on the table. Victor's memo contains a section at the end, pages 11 through 14, that we didn't discuss yet. She looked at Ethan steadily. It raises questions about the decision to hire you specifically for this project. It implies that the hire was influenced by personal considerations rather than professional merit. The hallway was very quiet. He's going after the contractor selection, Ethan said. He's implying that Nora's judgment was compromised, Diana said. He doesn't say it outright, but the implication is there. Ethan looked at Nora. Her jaw was set. She was looking at a fixed point on the opposite wall with the focused blankness of someone who is keeping themselves very controlled by concentrating on something that requires no feeling. "He's going to use me to discredit you," Ethan said. "He's going to try." Her voice was steady. "It's circumstantial. There's nothing to point to." "There doesn't have to be." He'd seen this before in his previous career. In the world of big money and larger egos, you didn't need proof of a thing to make it damaging. You only needed the suggestion. The question planted in the right mind at the right moment. "Who told him about—" He stopped. "About us spending time together." The phrase landed oddly. Nora looked at him. "Working together," he said, "outside of regular hours." "The estate has a security camera at the front gate," Diana said. "Victor's people could have pulled the access logs. They'd show both your vehicles present on multiple evenings. That's not evidence of anything." "No," Diana said. "It's not, but it's a story. And Victor is very good at stories." Nora stood up and walked to the window. She stood with her back to them for a moment, looking out at the garden where the pavilion frame was visible, where Carl and Marcus were already working in the morning light. "I'm going to need you to step back from the project," she said. Ethan heard the words, but they didn't process correctly. "What?" She turned around. Her face was composed, but her eyes were doing something different. "Temporarily. On paper. We restructure the contract so that Danny is the primary point of contact and you're a consulting advisor." "That won't help," he said. "Victor's already made the implication. Restructuring the contract now looks like a response to it, which confirms the story." "Then what do you suggest?" "I suggest we don't retreat." He said it firmly, but not unkindly. "If you pull back from anything, the contract, the evening work sessions, the board presentation, I'm building it looks like guilt. And it gives Victor exactly what he wants, which is you second-guessing every decision you've made." She studied him. "And if the board interprets our working relationship as something it isn't, then we stand in front of them and explain exactly what it is." He held her gaze. "I'm a professional you hired to do a job that requires collaboration and long hours. That's the truth. The truth is the easiest thing to stand behind." Diana was watching both of them with the careful attention of someone who was cataloging more than she was letting on. She put her glasses back on. "He's right," she said. "Retreating is worse. We address it directly in the counter memo. We lead with Ethan's professional credentials, his actual professional credentials, not the version Victor's going to present. And we make the hire look like exactly what it was, Nora bringing in the best available expertise for a critical project." Nora was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You'd have to let us use your full professional history. Coal venues. Everything." Ethan thought about that. He'd spent 7 years not being the man who built coal venues. He'd built something quieter and smaller and entirely his own, and he'd been careful about who knew what he used to be. Partly because it didn't matter anymore. Partly because it was easier to be just Ethan Cole Lilly's father, the guy who fixed things, than to carry the weight of what he used to be capable of. But this wasn't about him. "Use it," he said. Nora held his gaze for a long moment. Something in her expression shifted. Opened that door again, swinging on its hinge. "Okay," she said. The three of them worked through the morning. Diana drafted and redrafted. Ethan pulled documentation and formatted it and argued with Diana about 2 exhibit labels that he maintained were clearer his way and she maintained were not. They compromised. Nora moved between their work session and 3 separate phone calls, one of which was with her attorney, and lasted 40 minutes and ended with her standing in the garden saying, "I understand the risk. Proceed," and hanging up. Around noon, Danny appeared in the hallway doorway. "Boss, can I show you something in the ballroom?" Ethan followed him. The mosaic tile from yesterday was now fully uncovered, a 10-foot section of original 1948 floor. Blues and creams, and those small repeating sea glass shapes running from the entrance toward the center of the room. It was extraordinary. "We found more under the west section," Danny said. It might go wall to wall under all that linoleum. Ethan crouched down and ran his hand across the surface. Some of the tiles were cracked. Some were missing. But the pattern was intact, readable, still telling whatever story the craftsman had set into it 75 years ago. "Photograph everything," he said. "Every inch. Don't disturb it." He stood up. "This goes in the board presentation." Danny grinned. "Thought you'd say that." Ethan brought Nora in to see it at 1:30. She stood at the entrance to the ballroom and looked at the uncovered section and didn't say anything for a full 30 seconds. Then she said very quietly, "My grandmother used to describe this floor. She said it was like walking on the ocean." He didn't say anything. He let her have the moment. "I thought she'd imagined it," Nora said. "I thought it was just a story she told because she loved the estate." She looked at him. "It was real. It was real," he said. She crouched down the way he had and put her hand flat on the tiles, and he watched her and thought about what Diana had said that morning. "Victor's going to use you to discredit her," and felt something that wasn't quite anger, but was in the same neighborhood as it. Not for himself. For her. For the woman crouching on a 75-year-old mosaic floor, touching something her grandmother had described and never stopped believing in. Some things were worth defending. He'd known that for a long time in theory. He hadn't felt it this specifically in years. "I'm going to need one more thing," he said. She looked up at him. "I need you to let me call Margaret Tull directly," he said. "Today, before Victor gets to her again." Nora stood. "She doesn't take cold calls." "I know. I need you to make the introduction. Tell her I'm the person restoring the estate your grandfather built, and I have something I'd like to show her." "And what are you going to show her?" He looked at the mosaic floor stretching out across the ballroom entrance. Blues and creams and sea glass shapes as real and present as it had been in 1948. "The ocean," he said. Nora looked at him for a moment. Then she took her phone out of her pocket and scrolled to Margaret Tull's contact. She made the call. Margaret answered on the third ring, and Ethan listened to Nora's voice change, soften, slightly, become more personal. The CEO armor dropping an inch. She said, "Margaret, I have someone who's been working on the estate. He found something I think you need to see. His name is Ethan Cole, and he is someone worth listening to." She held the phone out to him. He took it. "Mrs. Tull," he said. "My name is Ethan Cole. I've been restoring the Harrow Grand Estate for the last 3 weeks. This morning, my crew uncovered the original ballroom mosaic from 1948. I'd like to send you photographs." He paused. "And then I'd like to tell you what this estate is actually worth. Because I think someone has been telling the board a different number, and I think you deserve the accurate one." A silence on the other end. Then a woman's voice, old but sharp. The kind of sharp that doesn't soften with age, said, "How soon can you send the photographs?" He looked at Nora. She was watching him with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Not the CEO, not the composed professional. Something underneath both of those, something that looked like a woman who had spent a very long time waiting to not have to fight alone. "Within the hour," Ethan said. "Then send them," Margaret Tull said. "And Mr. Cole, tell Nora her father would be glad she hired you." The call ended. Ethan handed the phone back to Nora. She looked at the screen for a moment. When she looked up, her eyes were bright, in a way she was controlling carefully, and he understood instinctively that Nora Whitfield did not cry in front of people, not in front of investors, not in front of board members, not in front of attorneys. She cried on floors and empty hallways when she thought no one was watching. "Thank you," she said. It was a simple thing to say. But the way she said it, like it cost her something to receive help, like accepting it required a kind of trust she'd been out of practice with, made it land with a weight that simple things sometimes carry. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "We have a board meeting to survive." She straightened her blazer. "Right. Back to business. Back to the armor clicked into place. But she walked back toward the hallway with something slightly different in her posture. Something that looked less like carrying and more like standing. He followed her. Diana was still at the folding table, typing at a speed that suggested she ran on caffeine and competitive instinct. She looked up when they walked in. "How'd Margaret take it?" "She wants the photographs," Nora said. Diana looked at Ethan. "I knew I liked you," she said, and went back to typing. The afternoon moved fast, the way productive afternoons do, hours contracting under the weight of real work. And by the time Ethan's crew called it for the day at 5:30, they had a draft counter memo, a preliminary exhibit package, and confirmed calls scheduled with 2 of the 4 swing vote board members. Ethan was the last one out as usual. He locked up the side entrance and walked to his truck and sat in it for a moment without starting the engine. The estate rose behind him in the late light, its weathered face and good bones and hidden mosaic floor, all the beauty that had been sitting here waiting to be found again. His grandfather had built it for love. Nora was fighting for it for love, even if she wouldn't call it that. Love of her father's memory. Love of what the place stood for. Love of the idea that some things were worth preserving exactly because they couldn't be replicated. His phone buzzed. Lily. "Dad, when are you home?" He smiled and started the truck. "Hour and a half. Diane has the key. She's making me eat vegetables." "Good. Dad. Eat the vegetables, Lil." He pulled out of the gate and onto the coastal road, and the ocean was somewhere to his left in the dark, and he thought about Margaret Tull's voice on the phone. Tell Nora her father would be glad she hired you, and thought about what it meant to be hired for one thing and turn out to be needed for something else entirely. He'd spent 7 years being only what Lily needed him to be. Quietly, determinedly, joyfully. He didn't regret a single hour of it. But something was waking up that he'd thought he'd buried. And the trouble with buried things, he knew from experience, was that they were very often not as buried as you thought. The board presentation package was finished at 11:47 on a Wednesday night, and Diana sent Ethan a text that said simply, "Clean. Professional. Devastating. Get some sleep." He read it sitting at his kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee, and Lily's school drawings spread around him, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a professional context in years. The specific satisfaction of work that mattered. He was up again at 5:15. Not because his alarm went off. Because his mind had been running the numbers and the arguments and the counterpositions in the background all night, like a program that never fully closes. And somewhere around 5 a.m., it surfaced an answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. He lay in the dark for a few minutes, making sure the answer was real and not just the product of too little sleep and too much coffee. Then he got up and called his former colleague James Whitmore in Charleston, who answered on the 4th ring, sounding like a man who had been awake for hours and was only slightly surprised to hear from Ethan. "The Anderson appraisal," Ethan said without preamble. "You've seen his work before." "Morning to you too, Ethan." James. A sigh. "Yeah, I've seen his work." On the Callaway Marina project in 2019, he produced 2 versions. A pause. The particular silence of someone deciding something. "I heard about that," James said carefully. "I need to know if you can confirm it. Officially. In writing." Another pause. Longer. "That's not a small ask." "I know it's not." "What's this for?" A woman is about to lose her company because a board member commissioned a fraudulent appraisal to support a property sale that benefits him personally. Ethan kept his voice level. "She's fighting it with honest data. I want to give her every honest tool available." The silence stretched long enough that Ethan thought James was going to say no. He'd rehearsed the version of this conversation where James said no. He'd decided he'd accept it. "Send me the Anderson report," James said finally. "I'll look at it today." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. If this goes sideways, I'm going to be very unhappy. If this goes sideways, I'll owe you a very good dinner." "You owe me several already." James hung up. Ethan sat at the kitchen table until he heard Lily's feet on the stairs, the specific rhythm of her morning descent, 2 steps, pause, 3 steps, the slight drag on the last one before the landing. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, with her hair at an angle that suggested she'd been sleeping sideways, which she did when she was processing something complicated. He'd noticed that about her when she was 4, and it had never stopped being true. "You're already up," she said. "I'm always up. You look like you're thinking hard. I'm making your lunch." She looked at the counter. He had not started making her lunch. He hadn't moved from the table. She regarded him with the patient accuracy of a 7-year-old who had inherited her mother's talent for noticing exactly what was in front of her. "Is it the job?" she asked. "Partly." She climbed into her chair. "Is it the lady?" He looked at her. "What lady?" She gave him a look that conveyed with impressive economy that she was 7 and not completely uninformed about the world. "Mrs. Diane said you've been working late a lot. She said there was a lady at the job." "There is a client at the job. That is standard for jobs, Lily." "Is she nice?" He got up and started making her lunch because it was a more manageable activity than this conversation. "She's professional." "That's not what I asked." He put 2 slices of bread on the counter. "She works very hard. She's trying to protect something her father built." Lily thought about this. "Like how you protected Grandpa's tools when you moved." He stopped. He hadn't thought of it that way. His father's tools, the ones he'd inherited and kept in a separate case and never lent to anyone, even when it would have been practical. The things you protect because they were someone else's love made concrete. "Yeah," he said. "Like that." Lily nodded seriously. "I think that's a good reason." "Me too." She ate her breakfast and he drove her to school, and she kissed him on the cheek before she got out of the car, which she was still young enough to do without embarrassment, and he sat in the school pickup line for a moment, after she disappeared through the doors, watching other kids stream in with backpacks and lunch boxes, and the complete confidence that the building would be warm and the adults would be prepared. He thought about what it meant to fight for something your father built, to carry that weight not as a burden, but as a purpose. He understood it. More specifically, he understood it in a way that Victor Crane, with his silver hair and his accommodating appraisals and his 6 a.m. attorney calls, probably never would. That was the difference between them. He drove to the estate. The board meeting was in 4 days. The investor preview was 5 days after that. The timeline was so compressed, it left no room for mistakes, and absolutely no room for what happened that Thursday afternoon. He was in the ballroom overseeing the final stage of mosaic documentation when Danny appeared in the doorway, with an expression Ethan recognized as the precursor to bad news, the particular set of a person's face when they're deciding how to phrase something they don't want to say. "What?" Ethan said. Not a question. "Victor Crane's on the property." Ethan set down his camera. "When did he come through the gate?" "He didn't. He came through the north access road, the old maintenance entrance." Danny paused. "He's with 2 men I don't recognize. One of them has a camera." Ethan was moving before Danny finished the sentence. He walked the length of the main corridor at a pace that was technically not running and emerged through the side entrance to find Victor Crane standing in the east garden with 2 men, one of whom was indeed holding a professional camera and was currently photographing the partially restored pavilion from an angle that would make it look considerably less finished than it was. Victor saw Ethan and smiled. The kind of smile that was specifically designed to communicate that the person smiling had the advantage and knew it. "Mr. Cole," he said, "I wasn't aware you'd be here today." "This is a private property and an active restoration site," Ethan said. "You need to leave. I have a right as a board member to inspect company assets. You have a right to request an inspection with 24 hours notice to the property manager, which in this case is Ms. Whitfield." Ethan kept his voice level and his eyes on the man with the camera. "You don't have a right to arrive unannounced through a maintenance entrance with a photographer." Victor tilted his head slightly. He was very good at performing relaxed. "We're just documenting current condition for the board. You documented current condition 10 days ago without notifying anyone. Whatever documentation you're collecting now is going directly to your attorney, not the board, And you and I both know that. Ethan looked at him steadily. Leave the property. If you want a formal inspection, submit the request to Ms. Whitfield's office in writing. Victor studied him for a moment. The smile didn't drop. If anything, it settled in slightly. You know what I find interesting, Mr. Cole? You speak with a great deal of authority for a man who is contractually a vendor. I speak with a great deal of clarity for a man who knows when someone is manufacturing a narrative. Ethan held his ground. Leave. Now. A beat. Oh. Then Victor nodded at his two companions, and the three of them walked back toward the North Access Road without hurry, taking their time about it, making sure it was clear that the departure was their choice and their timing. Ethan watched them go. Then he pulled out his phone and called Nora. She answered on the second ring. What's wrong? Victor was on the property, East Garden, North Access Road. He had a photographer. A silence that lasted exactly 3 seconds. I'm calling my attorney. I already told him to leave. He did, but... He got what he came for, she said. Whatever angle makes the restoration look incomplete. Yes. Another brief silence. How bad does the East Garden actually look from the pavilion? Honest answer. The frame looks good. The groundwork around the base doesn't look finished because it isn't. From the right angle with the right lens in a board presentation, it could look like the project is significantly behind schedule. Which is what he'll say. Which is what he'll say. He heard her exhale. Not dramatically. Just the breath of someone absorbing another impact and deciding to remain standing. Okay, she said. What do we do? We get our own photographs of the same location today from every angle with timestamps and a progress log attached. We preempt it. Can you do that today? I'm already walking back to the ballroom to get my camera. She was quiet for a moment. Ethan? Yeah. Thank you for being there when he showed up. It was a simple thing. It shouldn't have landed the way it did. He was there because it was his job to be there, because he arrived early and stayed late, and that was just how he worked. But that wasn't entirely why he was there, and they both knew it. I'll send you the photos by 4, he said. He spent the next 2 hours documenting the East Garden and Pavilion with the specific thoroughness of someone building an evidence package, which was exactly what he was doing. Pete helped holding a measuring tape and a reference board in each frame, so the scale was undeniable. Danny wrote up a progress log with dates and completion percentages, signed and dated. Marcus cataloged every material delivery receipt for the past 3 weeks. At 3:15, Diana called him instead of Nora. We have a problem, she said, and I need you to hear it before Nora does, because she's in a call with the attorney and I need to figure out how to tell her. He put down the camera. Tell me. I've been going through the financial records, all of them, not just the ones Victor cited in his memo. Diana's voice was controlled, but had a quality underneath it. Not panic, something more focused than panic. The specific tension of someone who has found a thing and is still determining how large it is. Victor has a holding company, Crane Capital Partners. It's structured as a blind trust supposedly, but the beneficial ownership filings have some gaps. Diana. The company that wants to buy this estate, the corporate hospitality chain Victor's been pushing the board toward, they have a silent investor. A pause. I think it's him. Ethan was very still. You think he arranged the sale of an asset to a company he owns a stake in? I don't have confirmation. I have an ownership structure that has 3 layers of shell companies between Victor and the buyer, and a law firm I don't recognize handling the transaction, and a series of consulting fees paid to an entity called Greystone Advisory Group that doesn't appear to have any public presence. Diana's voice was careful and precise. I need 2 things. I need a corporate attorney who can trace beneficial ownership structures, and I need someone with enough industry knowledge to identify whether Greystone Advisory Group is what I think it is. What do you think it is? I think it's Victor, she said. Ethan sat down on an overturned crate near the pavilion. He looked at the restored frame, the careful new woodwork, the ground that still needed another week of finishing, but was solid and true underneath. Give me the law firm name, he said. Diana gave it to him. He recognized it. He'd worked with them or against them twice in his previous career. They specialized in acquisition structures for hospitality properties. They were expensive, discreet, and they did not handle small transactions. The buyer isn't just a corporate chain, he said slowly, thinking through it as he spoke. They're an acquisition vehicle. Yes, Diana said. Victor is positioning to buy this estate through a structure that hides his involvement, using a board position to orchestrate the sale with a fraudulent appraisal to justify the price. He stopped. That's not just a conflict of interest. That's fraud. Yes, Diana said again. Which is why I need you to tell me I'm right before I take this to Nora, because if I'm right, this isn't just a board fight anymore. He thought about it. He went through every piece of it, the layered structure, the appraisal, the timeline, the board maneuver designed to remove Nora before the preview, the manufactured evidence of project delays. Every piece of it connected to every other piece. You're right, he said. Diana let out a breath that told him she'd been hoping he'd find a hole in it. Okay. How did you find it? Nora's father kept personal files, financial notes, correspondence, his own observations about board members going back 20 years. She gave me access to his office files after he passed to help with the estate administration. A pause. He wrote a note about Victor Crane 9 months before he died. It said Victor asked about Greystone again. Still not sure what he's building, but I don't like the shape of it. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment. Her father had seen it coming. He hadn't known exactly what it was, but he'd seen the shape of it. And then he'd died, and the seat he'd occupied, the knowledge and the authority and the watchfulness had passed to Nora, who'd been handed a company and a grief, and a board she hadn't had time to fully learn. And Victor had moved fast, because that's what people like Victor did. They moved into vacuums. Tell her, Ethan said. Tell her now. Don't wait for the attorney call to end. She's going to want to take it to the board immediately. She shouldn't, not until we have the beneficial ownership confirmed. If she accuses Victor in front of the board with circumstantial evidence, he'll discredit it, and her in the same motion. He stood up. She needs to give the information to her attorney first, tonight. The attorney files a discovery request before the board meeting. That changes the entire shape of the meeting. Diana was quiet for a moment. You've done this before. Not exactly this, but close enough. Ethan. Her voice shifted slightly, became more personal than her usual efficient register. She trusts you. I want you to know I see that, and I don't say that lightly, because she doesn't trust easily. A pause. Don't make me regret vouching for you. You didn't vouch for me, he said. I told her you were the real thing, Diana said. That's a vouch. He didn't answer for a moment. I won't make you regret it. He got into his truck and drove to the estate's main entrance and called Nora directly. The attorney call was still going. He texted, "Call me when you're done, before you do anything else." She called him 11 minutes later. He told her everything Diana had told him calmly, and in order the same way he'd explained structural problems to clients, not softening it, not dramatizing it, just the facts in sequence. She didn't interrupt. She listened with the focused silence of someone who was simultaneously processing information and building a response to it. When he finished, she said, "My father knew." The note suggests he suspected something. He didn't know the shape of it. He would have found it, she said quietly. Not with grief exactly, with the particular pride and ache that comes from knowing someone well enough to know what they were capable of. He was meticulous about this company. He would have found it. You found it, Ethan said. Diana found it. Diana works for you. You created the conditions for her to find it, including giving her access to your father's files when most people would have locked those away. He kept his voice steady. Don't give credit away that belongs to you. A silence. Take it to your attorney tonight, he said. Discovery request before the board meeting. That's the move. If we file discovery before the meeting, Victor will know we're on to him. Yes. He'll come at us harder. He can't come harder than manufactured fraud evidence and a covert property acquisition. He's already playing his best cards. He paused. The discovery request tells him the game changed. That's what you want. You want him to know he's not the only one with information. She breathed out slowly. And the board meeting? You walk into that room with the mosaic photographs, the counter-appraisal Margaret Tull on your side, and the knowledge that your attorney is building a fraud case against the man sitting across from you. He let that sit. You don't threaten him with it publicly, not yet, but you know it's there, and you let him wonder if you know. She was quiet for a long moment. That's cold, she said. It's accurate. You're describing a psychological strategy. I'm describing how to walk into a room with maximum information and minimum vulnerability. He paused. You're not doing anything dishonest. You're simply not announcing everything you know. Victor does that all the time. Yes, and it works. He kept his voice even. The difference is what you're protecting. Another silence. Then she said, I need to call the attorney. Yes, you do. Ethan. Her voice was different again, that register he'd started to recognize, the one underneath the CEO voice, quieter and more real. If this works, if we get through the board meeting and the preview and all of it, I want you to know that whatever happens with the estate, whatever happens with the company, what you did here. She stopped, restarted. What you did here mattered. It mattered a lot. He thought about saying something light, something that would let them both off the hook from the weight of the moment. He decided against it. Call your attorney, he said. We'll talk when this is over. She hung up. He sat in his truck outside the estate for a moment, watching the last of the afternoon light do what it does on the coast, which is arrive at a low angle that makes everything look more significant than it might otherwise be. His phone buzzed. Lily again. Dad, are you coming home for dinner? He started the truck. On my way. Diane made pot roast. Tell her she's a saint. She says she knows. He drove. The ocean was to his left again, and the road curved along the coast, and he thought about fraud and discovery requests and board meetings, and a woman who kept her father's files because she couldn't let go of the shape of him. And somewhere in the middle of all that thinking, he realized he'd stopped being objective about this somewhere around the time he sat down on a hallway floor at 6:45 in the evening and refused to pretend he hadn't heard her crying. That was the thing about caring. It didn't announce itself. It just arrived quietly, the way the tide arrives gradually, and then all at once, until suddenly the floor you were standing on was underwater and you were already in it before you understood what was happening. He pulled into his driveway at 6:52. The kitchen light was on. Through the window he could see Lily setting the table with her tongue between her teeth, the expression she made when she was concentrating on doing something exactly right. He sat in the truck for an extra moment, just watching her. Whatever happened in the next 4 days, the board meeting, the discovery request, Victor's inevitable countermove, he was going to face it the same way he'd faced everything since Sarah died. Clearly, honestly, without flinching. Not because he was fearless, because Lily was watching. And because somewhere in Harrow Bay, a woman was on the phone with her attorney, fighting for something her father believed in, and she wasn't fighting alone anymore. He got out of the truck and went inside. Lily looked up from the table. You look serious. I'm hungry, he said. She studied him with her mother's eyes. You also look like something happened. Lots of things happened. That's what days are. She accepted this with the particular grace of a child who has learned when to push and when to let a thing settle. Diane made enough for 6 people, she said. She says she cooks big because it's more efficient. Diane is extremely practical. She also asked if you were bringing anyone home for dinner. Lily delivered this with theatrical innocence. I told her probably not. He looked at his daughter. She looked back at him with the expression she'd inherited from nobody, purely her own invention, a blend of complete serenity and absolute mischief that was one of his favorite things in the world. Eat your pot roast, he said. She grinned and sat down. He sat across from her and they ate, and Diane was an excellent cook, and the kitchen was warm, and outside the evening was coming in off the water, the way it did on the coast, slowly, completely replacing everything that came before it with the particular darkness of a place that has learned to let things go and start again. Tomorrow was Friday. The board meeting was Monday. He was ready. The weekend before the board meeting, Ethan worked the estate like a man possessed, not frantically. He'd never been a frantic worker. Frantic was what happened when you let urgency override judgment, and he'd learned early in his career that urgency without judgment produced expensive mistakes. He worked the way he always worked, methodically and completely, but with a compression that his crew felt and responded to without being asked. Saturday they finished the pavilion groundwork. Sunday Pete and Carl completed the mosaic restoration in the ballroom entrance, not the full floor, which would take another 2 weeks, but enough that the pattern was legible, wall to wall, the blues and creams of it restored to something close to what Nora's grandmother had walked across 75 years ago. Danny worked on the east wing, finishing details, while Ethan personally oversaw the repair of the grand staircase railing, which was original ironwork that had been damaged by water infiltration and needed hands-on attention. By Sunday evening, the estate looked different, not finished, but alive in a way it hadn't been 6 weeks ago. The bones of the place were showing through the work, and they were extraordinary bones. He photographed everything. 312 photographs over the weekend, organized by location, time-stamped, appended with progress notes. Diana built them into the presentation package Sunday night. She sent him a text at midnight that said, "This is going to work." Then a second one 30 seconds later. "Don't tell Nora I said that. I don't want to jinx it." He didn't sleep well Sunday night. Not from anxiety exactly. More from the specific alertness of someone standing on the edge of something they've prepared for as completely as preparation allows, knowing that preparation is not the same as control. He lay in the dark, going over scenarios. What Victor would say, what the swing votes might need to hear, where the weak points in the counter memo were, how Margaret Tull would position herself if the vote went closer than they'd calculated. At 3:15 in the morning, Nora texted him, "Are you awake?" He looked at his phone for a moment. "Yes," he typed back. "My attorney called. The discovery request has been filed." Victor's attorney responded within 2 hours. He sat up. 2 hours is fast. My attorney says it means they've been anticipating this. They're not surprised. They're prepared. He thought about that. It could mean they were rattled and had counsel on standby. It could mean they'd planned for the eventuality of discovery and had a defense already constructed. He typed, "What does your attorney think?" A pause. Longer than the others. "She thinks it tells us Victor knew there was something to find." People don't respond to discovery requests in 2 hours unless they're protecting something specific. "That's good," he typed. "That's actually good." She said the same thing. "I'm trying to believe her." He looked at the ceiling. Then he typed, "Your father left you notes about Victor because he didn't trust him." He was right. You're going to walk into that room tomorrow with his judgment and yours and 9 weeks of evidence, and an attorney who filed discovery at what I assume was an unreasonable hour. You're ready. The pause this time was very long. Long enough that he thought she might have set the phone down. Then, "How are you not worried?" "I didn't say I'm not worried," he typed. "I said you're ready. Those are different things." Another pause. Then, "Get some sleep, Ethan." "You too." He set the phone down. Lily was asleep in the next room, making the small sounds she made when she was deeply under, not quite snoring, more like breathing with emphasis. He listened to it for a while in the dark and found it, as he always did, steadying. He fell asleep around 4. He was up at 6. He dropped Lily at school at 8, kissed her on the top of the head, told her he had an important meeting today, and she said, "Good luck, Dad," with the matter-of-fact sincerity of someone who meant it exactly as much as she said it. Then she ran toward the school doors and disappeared, and he sat in the pickup line watching the space where she'd been. He drove to the estate. He put on a jacket he'd brought specifically for today, not a suit because he wasn't a board member, but something that communicated he understood the gravity of what he was walking into. He'd learned early in his first career that clothes were a form of argument. You dressed for the room you wanted to be taken seriously in. Nora and Diana were already in the estate's main conference room, which had been cleared and set up specifically for the board meeting. Nora was at the head of the table, organizing materials with the focus of someone who had converted every nervous impulse into productive motion. Diana was running through the slide deck on a laptop, clicking through each exhibit at the pace of someone timing the presentation. Nora looked up when Ethan walked in. She was wearing a dark navy blazer, perfectly pressed, her hair pulled back. She looked like exactly what she was, a CEO preparing to defend her company. But he could see in the particular set of her jaw and the way she held herself half an inch more erect than usual the cost of looking that composed. "Morning," he said. "Morning." She looked at his jacket. Something in her expression registered it without commenting on it. "Diana," he said. "Third exhibit needs a header adjustment," Diana said without looking up. "I fixed it. Don't touch anything." "I wasn't going to touch anything." "You were going to suggest something. I could feel it." He sat down and reviewed his own copy of the board package. It was good work. It was honestly some of the most thorough property case material he'd assembled since his Cole Venues days. The counter-appraisal from his 3 independent contacts was airtight coastal comparables, accurate cost structures, a projected revenue analysis that was conservative enough to be credible and strong enough to be compelling. The mosaic photographs were arresting. The progress documentation was undeniable. The exhibit at the back, the beneficial ownership analysis prepared by Nora's attorney, was the one he kept returning to. It was careful and precisely worded, full of phrases like "suggests a pattern" and "warrants further investigation and preliminary indications." Not an accusation. A question. A formally posed, legally framed, devastating question. "Has Victor seen the discovery filing?" Ethan asked. "His attorney has," Nora said. "He hasn't acknowledged it personally." "He will in that room." "I know." "Do you know how you're going to handle it?" She looked at him. "I'm going to let my attorney's exhibit speak for itself and answer questions without volunteering more than I'm asked." "Good. I'm also going to make sure the board votes on the restoration before the discovery information enters the conversation." He nodded. It was the right sequence. Lead with the estate, the work, the vision, the financial argument. Establish her credibility and the project's success before the conflict element arrived. Let Victor be the one who turned the meeting adversarial. "Margaret Tull confirmed she's attending in person," Diana said, still not looking up from the laptop. "She called me this morning at 7:15 to say she'd reviewed the photographs 3 times and wanted to make a comment about the mosaic tile that I think is going to matter." "What comment?" Nora asked. Diana finally looked up. "She said she was at the opening celebration in 1952, the one where your grandfather first opened the ballroom to the public. She said she danced on that floor." A pause. "She also said that if the board votes to sell this estate to a corporate chain, she will be resigning her seat on general principle." The room was very quiet. "She told you that," Nora said. "She told me that. She asked me to tell you specifically before the meeting. She said she wanted you to walk in knowing." Diana looked at her laptop again. "I think she wanted you to know you weren't alone in there." Nora sat down. Just for a moment she sat down and put her hand flat on the table, the way she'd put her hand on the mosaic tile, and he understood that she was doing the same thing, grounding herself in something solid and real. He thought about saying something. He decided she didn't need words right now. She needed to have the moment she was having. After a few seconds, she straightened. "What time are they arriving?" 9:30, Diana said. "We have 40 minutes. Nora nodded. She stood back up. She looked at Ethan. "When Victor challenges your presence in this room, he's going to challenge my presence in this room. He's going to suggest that a contractor shouldn't be presenting to the board on matters of company strategy. Then you tell him I've been retained as a specialized consultant and that my professional background qualifies me to speak to the property valuation question specifically." Ethan kept his voice even, which is exactly true. "And if he pushes harder, then I will present my professional history and let the board decide whether it qualifies me to have an opinion." He paused. "Victor is going to try to make my presence the issue because if he's arguing about whether I should be in the room, he's not arguing about the appraisal numbers." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're not nervous at all, are you?" "I'm nervous," he said. "I'm just not going to let it run the meeting." She held his gaze for another moment. Then she turned to Diana. "Show me the third exhibit again, the one you adjusted." They went through the materials one more time. Ethan made 2 small suggestions that Diana implemented without argument, which he recognized as the highest available form of professional respect from a woman who didn't accept suggestions easily. Nora read through her opening statement, not out loud, just her eyes moving across the page, her lips barely moving the way they did when she was really absorbing something. At 9:27, the board members began arriving. He watched them come in. He'd studied their names and backgrounds from the information Diana had provided. It was what he'd always done before a major presentation: know your audience well enough to speak to each person in the room, not just the room in aggregate. James Calloway came in first. 64, silver-haired, third-generation hospitality industry. He'd been on the board for 12 years. He shook hands with Nora with the warmth of someone who genuinely liked her and the restraint of someone in a complicated institutional position. He nodded at Ethan with the particular look of a man who was reserving judgment. Patricia Sung came in next with Robert DeLeon immediately behind her, talking quietly. Swing votes. DeLeon glanced at the exhibit materials on the table with the focused attention of someone who read financial documents the way other people read novels, hungrily looking for plot. Margaret Tull came in 5th, moving slowly but without fragility, using a cane that she held with the confidence of someone who'd made peace with needing it. She was small and white-haired, and she had eyes that had clearly been seeing through nonsense for 8 decades, and had not tired of the work. She came directly to Ethan. "You're Cole," she said. "Yes, ma'am. I know your work. The Bellamy Estate in Savannah. I attended a wedding there in 2016. She studied him with those clear, tireless eyes. "You built something real there." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. It's an observation, not a compliment." She looked at the mosaic photographs in the exhibit package on the table. "You found the floor." "My crew found it. I just knew what to do with it." Something moved in her expression. Approval, maybe. The particular approval of someone who values people who share credit accurately. "Good answer," she said, and moved to her seat. Victor Crane was the last to arrive. He came in at 9:34, 4 minutes late, which Ethan recognized as a calculated entry, late enough to make a statement early enough not to be challenged on it. He was dressed precisely suited, and he brought with him a man Ethan didn't recognize, who sat along the wall rather than at the table. Nora looked at the man along the wall. "Victor," she said, "you've brought someone who isn't on the board." "My advisory consultant," Victor said pleasantly. "Given the complexity of the matters on today's agenda, I thought, if you're bringing an additional advisor, we apply the same standard to our expert consultant." She looked at Ethan, who was also sitting to the side, not at the table. "Mr. Cole, please take a seat at the table." Victor looked at Ethan. The pleasantness didn't shift. "I'm not sure the board has agreed to." "Mr. Cole has been retained as a specialized property consultant. His credentials are outlined in Exhibit A of your board package." Nora's voice was steady and measured, and completely without apology. "He'll be presenting on the property valuation question. If the board objects, we can take a procedural vote." A brief silence. DeLeon, who had been leafing through Exhibit A, looked up. "I don't object," he said. "I'm actually curious to hear it." No one else objected. Victor smiled and sat down. Nora opened the meeting. She was extraordinary at it. He'd seen her manage logistics and organize events and handle crisis calls, and he'd known she was capable, but watching her run a board meeting was something different. She controlled the room without appearing to control it, directed the conversation without appearing to direct it, and moved through the agenda with a precision that left no gaps for derailment. She presented the restoration progress first. The photographs, the timeline, the completed and scheduled work. She walked through the mosaic tile discovery, as though it were exactly what it was remarkable evidence of the estate's irreplaceable historical character. De Leon asked 3 financial questions. She answered all of them from memory without consulting her notes. Margaret Tull asked 1 question about the East Garden timeline and listened to the answer with the focused attention of someone for whom this was not abstract. Then she introduced Ethan. He stood and presented the counter-appraisal. He did it the way he used to do it in his Cole Venues days, leading with the story, the numbers told, not the numbers themselves. He walked them through the coastal comparables, the market positioning the revenue trajectory under full restoration. He cited sources by name and reputation. He explained specifically and simply why the Anderson appraisal's baseline comparison was methodologically inaccurate, and he did it without drama or accusation, just with the patient clarity of someone who knew the subject well enough not to need to perform knowing it. He watched De Leon's face throughout. De Leon was a financial reader, and what he was reading was landing. Patricia Sung was taking notes. Calloway was nodding slightly, the small involuntary nod of someone processing information that's confirming something they already suspected. Victor sat with his hands folded on the table and his face pleasantly arranged, and his advisor along the wall writing things down. When Ethan finished, Victor said, "Thank you, Mr. Cole. Very thorough." The compliment was a move. Ethan recognized it. "Accept the competence, prepare to redirect it. I do want to raise a question." Victor continued addressing the board, rather than Ethan, about the context of Mr. Cole's involvement in this project. Not his professional qualifications, those are clearly substantial. He paused, performing careful consideration. But the board should be aware that Mr. Cole's engagement with Ms. Whitfield has extended beyond standard contractor-client boundaries, and I think given the questions we're here to resolve today, that context is relevant. The room shifted. The specific shift of people in a formal setting when something personal enters the air. Nora's expression didn't change. Ethan looked at Victor. "Victor," he said. His voice was completely level. "The question you're raising suggests that Ms. Whitfield's judgment was compromised by a personal relationship. I'd ask you to be specific about what evidence supports that claim, because a suggestion without evidence isn't information. It's a strategy." Victor tilted his head slightly. "I'm simply noting. You're noting that 2 professionals who worked closely together on a time-sensitive project with significant stakes appear to have developed mutual respect." Ethan held his gaze. "If you're suggesting that mutual respect disqualifies either of us from this room, I'd point out that the same standard would apply to any relationship of influence on this board." He paused, just long enough. "Including relationships between board members and the companies they stand to benefit from." The room was very still. Victor's expression didn't change. But something shifted behind his eyes, a recalibration the way a chess player's focus changes when they realize a piece they thought was undefended is covered. Calloway looked from Victor to Ethan. De Leon set down his pen. Nora let the silence sit for exactly the right amount of time. Then she said, "I'd like to move to the final exhibit in the board package, Exhibit G." She looked around the table. "I want to note that this exhibit was prepared by my legal counsel and filed as part of a formal discovery request on Friday evening. The filing has been acknowledged by Victor's counsel." She watched Victor when she said it. His expression held. He was very good. But something at the corners of his eyes went tight, and that tightness told Ethan everything he needed to know about how thoroughly the man had calculated the probability of this moment. He hadn't thought she'd file before the meeting. He'd thought she'd be reactive, not preemptive. He'd underestimated her. People who assumed Nora Whitfield led with emotion consistently underestimated her. That was, Ethan thought, probably the most expensive mistake a person in her orbit could make. De Leon had already opened to Exhibit G. He read it in the silence, and as he read his expression, changed the specific change of someone encountering information that recontextualizes everything before it. "Victor," he said, without looking up from the exhibit. "This filing suggests a financial interest in the proposed buyer." "The filing suggests a speculative connection between," Victor began. It identifies a beneficial ownership structure through Crane Capital Partners that includes a 7.3% stake in Meridian Hospitality Holdings. De Leon looked up. Meridian is the proposed buyer of this estate. The room was completely quiet. Those ownership records are sealed, Victor said. His voice was still controlled, but the pleasantness was gone. What was left was the actual man underneath it, and the actual man was not pleasant at all. Sealed filings can be subject to discovery in litigation, Nora said, as my attorney explained in the filing itself. This is a fishing expedition, Victor said. This is exactly the kind of emotionally reactive decision-making I've been describing to this board. Instead of addressing the financial realities of this company, Ms. Whitfield is pursuing personal vendettas that could expose us to Victor. Margaret Tull's voice was quiet and entirely without drama. Everyone looked at her. She had not raised her voice. She didn't need to 81 years of accumulated authority made volume unnecessary. I'd like to ask you a direct question. Victor turned to her. Something about his posture changed. Margaret was the one person in the room he couldn't dismiss. Do you have a financial interest in Meridian Hospitality Holdings? She said. A pause. My financial arrangements are structured through appropriate legal vehicles that comply with all. That's not an answer to my question, Margaret said. I asked you something simple. Do you have a financial interest in the company proposing to buy this estate, yes or no? Victor looked at her. He looked at the rest of the board. He looked at the man along the wall who was writing very fast. My attorneys will provide a complete accounting. Then I'll take that as a yes, Margaret said, and opened her board package to the voting record section. I'd like to call for a procedural motion. What happened in the next 40 minutes was the specific kind of institutional reckoning that occurs when the right information reaches people who have both the authority and the integrity to act on it. It was not dramatic in the movie sense. No one shouted, no one broke down. Victor maintained his composure with the particular discipline of a man who had survived difficult rooms before and had prepared contingencies. His advisor along the wall slipped out at some point during De Leon's second set of questions and could be heard in the hallway on his phone. But the room had turned. Ethan could feel it the way you feel a weather change before it's visible in the quality of the air, in the posture of the people around the table, in the way questions were now directed at Nora rather than at Victor. De Leon asked Nora about the revenue projections for the next fiscal year under full restoration. She answered without hesitation, cleanly and specifically citing figures that aligned with Ethan's analysis and diverged significantly from what Victor had presented in his memo. Calloway asked about the investor preview, and Nora walked him through the timeline, the current completion status, the confirmed attendees. Patricia Sung asked about the Greystone Advisory Group, and Nora's attorney, who was on the phone via speaker, explained the discovery findings in precise, careful, legally appropriate language. Victor's responses throughout were measured and composed and increasingly insufficient. He was not a man who fell apart under pressure. Ethan gave him that. He was a man who had calculated multiple scenarios and was now moving through his fallback positions with professional thoroughness. But every fallback position existed in a room that had already heard Exhibit G, and there was no undoing that. The vote on the removal motion, the motion Victor had initiated against Nora's leadership, was called at 11:15. 12 votes. 7 needed to remove. 9 needed to survive. Ethan was sitting along the wall. He was not a board member. He was not part of the vote. He was a contractor, a consultant, a man who had driven 3 hours to be in this room for reasons he had not fully articulated, even to himself. He watched Nora at the head of the table. Her hands were folded in front of her. Her face was still. Whatever she was feeling was entirely internal, managed with a completeness of control that he recognized now as one of the things that cost her the most, the ongoing daily effort of carrying everything without putting any of it down. He wanted to tell her she could put it down. He wasn't sure she knew how anymore. The vote went around the table. Margaret Tull voted first. Against removal, she said, and looked directly at Nora when she said it. Calloway voted against removal. Sung voted against. De Leon voted against removal, and as he did, he looked at Victor with the flat expression of a man who was recalibrating a professional relationship he'd held for years. Victor voted for removal. His two certain allies voted with him. The remaining votes fell in the direction the room had established. When it was over, the count was 9-3-4. Nora Whitfield kept her position as CEO of Whitfield Hospitality Group. The meeting didn't end dramatically. The board members gathered their materials, spoke in small groups, scheduled follow-up calls. Margaret Tull made her way around the table to Nora and took both of her hands in hers and said something quietly that Ethan couldn't hear, and Nora listened with a stillness that was different from her professional stillness, softer at the edges, less maintained. Victor Crane picked up his materials and walked out without speaking to anyone. His advisor was already gone. Diana caught Ethan's eye from across the room and gave him a single nod. Not celebratory, she wasn't that kind of person. Just a nod that meant we did it. He nodded back. After the board members had gone and Diana was packing up materials and the conference room was beginning to return to its ordinary silence, Nora stood at the head of the table and looked at the exhibit packages stacked there, and the mosaic photographs, and the counter-appraisal, and all the pieces of the argument they'd built over the past 10 days. Ethan walked up to the table and began stacking things. "You don't have to," she started. "I know I don't have to," he said. Again. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said very quietly, 9-3. 9-3, he confirmed. Margaret said my father would have been proud. Her voice was even, but something underneath it wasn't. She said it like she knew him, which she did. She knew him for 40 years. She would know. "What do you think?" She looked at the mosaic photographs. "I think he would have found the floor himself eventually. He wouldn't have stopped until he did." She paused. "I think he would have fought this the same way." "With evidence," Ethan said. "With evidence." She looked at him. And with someone he trusted in the room. He looked at her. She looked at him. The conference room was very quiet, and Diana was making the polite and highly deliberate noise of someone who has decided to take a very long time finding something in her bag. "What happens to Victor?" Ethan asked. "The discovery process continues. His attorney will argue. Mine will push." She reached out and straightened a stack of folders without particular purpose. "The beneficial ownership question will probably become litigation. It could take a year. But he's done with the board. Calloway and De Leon are already calling for a formal conflict of interest review. He'll resign before he's removed. People like Victor always do. They find the exit that preserves the most appearance of control." She said it without bitterness, just with the clear-eyed accuracy of someone who had studied her opponent long enough to understand him. "And the estate. The investor preview is 5 days from now." She looked at him directly. "Will it be ready?" He thought about the East Garden, the finished pavilion, the restored ballroom entrance, the mosaic floor, the east wing that still needed finish work on the window casings, and the restored plaster in the third corridor. He thought about his crew, and what they could do in 5 days, if they ran it like the last stretch of a marathon. Everything you have, nothing held back. "Yes," he said. She held his gaze for a moment. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." Something moved through her expression. That look again, the one he'd started to recognize as her most honest face, the one that appeared when she stopped managing what she showed him. "I don't know how to thank you for what you did today," she said. "In that room." When Victor raised the when, he implied, "You don't need to thank me for that. I need to say it anyway." She looked at him steadily. "You defended me in a way that didn't make me look like I needed defending. That's a very specific skill, and I want you to know, I noticed it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I defended the truth. You happen to be standing in it." She looked at him for a long time. "That's either the best thing anyone has said to me in years," she said, "or you're the most infuriating man I've ever met." "Probably both," he said. And there it was, not the shadow of a smile this time, not the cousin. The real thing, full and unguarded and entirely unexpected, and it arrived with a laugh brief and genuine, and it changed the whole quality of the room. Diana appeared from behind her bag. "I found what I was looking for," she announced to no one holding up a pen. "Wonderful. Shall we go? The crew needs direction for the week." Ethan looked at Nora. 5 days, he said. 5 days, she agreed. He drove to the estate and gathered his crew, and they went to work, and the afternoon was loud and physical and completely absorbing, and he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was built to do. And underneath all of that, underneath the timelines and the finish work and the 5-day sprint to something extraordinary, was the steady, quiet, slightly terrifying knowledge that the board meeting was over and the estate was almost done. And the reason he was still here had very little to do with the contract. He finished late. He drove home. Lily was asleep already, which meant Diane had fed her and put her to bed, which happened sometimes on long days, and which he always felt a particular mix of gratitude and guilt about. He checked on her. She was sleeping sideways again, processing something. He pulled the blanket up and stood in her doorway in the dark. His phone buzzed. Nora. A text. "My grandmother used to say this estate was built so love could happen here. I always thought that was sentimental." He looked at the message. "What do you think now?" he typed back. A pause. "I think she knew things I'm still learning." He looked at that for a long moment. Then he typed, "Get some sleep. You too." He closed Lily's door softly and went to bed. And for the first time in longer than he could easily calculate, he fell asleep without running numbers, or logistics, or scenarios. He fell asleep thinking about a woman who was learning to let things be true, without arguing with them first. It was, he thought, a very good sign. The 5 days before the investor preview were the kind of days Ethan Cole used to live inside the compressed, total focus final push of a project where everything that wasn't essential fell away, and what remained was just the work and the people doing it, and the thing being built. He arrived at the estate at 6 every morning. His crew was there by 6:30. Danny ran the East Wing finish team. Carl and Marcus handled the garden and exterior. Pete, who had developed a personal investment in the mosaic floor that bordered on devotion, led the ballroom team with 2 additional workers they'd brought in specifically for the final week. Nora was there every day. Not managing him, she'd stopped trying to manage him sometime around week 3, which he recognized as a form of trust more significant than anything she'd said out loud. She managed her own side of the preparation, the investor communications, the event logistics, the staffing for the preview, the catering coordination, the florals that the same florist from weeks ago was now executing with the confidence of someone who'd had 3 separate planning sessions with Nora and knew exactly what was expected. They worked in parallel, their 2 worlds, overlapping constantly without colliding. He'd pass her in the main corridor, and she'd hand him a coffee without breaking stride. She'd appear in the doorway of the ballroom and ask a specific question about timeline, and he'd give her a specific answer, and she'd disappear again. They moved through the estate like 2 people who had calibrated themselves to the same frequency without discussing it. Diana drove down Wednesday morning and stayed through the weekend. She set up a mobile office in the estate's small sitting room and ran the communications operation from there with the efficiency of a field commander, which was, Ethan had concluded, exactly what she was. On Wednesday afternoon, Diana appeared in the ballroom doorway while Pete was supervising the final mosaic work and Ethan was reviewing the ceiling repair in the far corner. "Offer came in," she said. Ethan turned. "What offer?" "For you." She looked at him with her reading glasses, on which meant she was being formal. "Renwick Development Group. They want to talk to you about leading their historic properties division. Full creative authority. Compensation package that would..." She named a number. "They've been trying to reach you through your old contact at Cole Venues for 2 weeks. He looked at her. "How do you know this?" "Because James Whitmore called Nora's office this morning to make sure the message reached you. He said you'd probably ignored his emails." A pause. "Had you?" He had. He'd seen Whitmore's emails, 2 of them in the last 10 days, and filed them in the same mental category as things that required more bandwidth than he currently had available. "Renwick is a serious firm," Diana said. "I know who Renwick is. Then you know this is not a small offer." She looked at him steadily. "I'm telling you because Nora doesn't know yet, and I think you should decide whether you want her to know before or after the preview." He looked at her. "Why would it matter?" Diana studied him for a moment over her glasses with the expression of a woman who was choosing her words carefully because she'd thought about this more than he had. "Because if you take it, you're likely based in Chicago. And if you don't take it, I want to know it's because you made that decision clearly and not because the timing made it easy to ignore." She paused. "You're the kind of person who makes things work. You're also the kind of person who sometimes makes things work so hard for other people that he forgets to make things work for himself." He was quiet. "Lily," he said finally, "is 7 years old and extraordinarily adaptable from everything I can observe." Diana picked up the folder she'd been holding. "She also told me Tuesday when I was watching her eat lunch that she wants to be a builder when she grows up, like her dad." She gave him a look that was fond and unsentimental in equal measure. "Just think about it. That's all I'm saying." She went back to her sitting room. He stood in the ballroom with the sounds of Pete's team working behind him and thought about Chicago and full creative authority and a number that would change the shape of his and Lily's life in material ways. He thought about what it had cost him to walk away from Cole Venues and what it had given him in return, and whether those accounts still balanced the same way they had 7 years ago. He didn't come to a conclusion. He went back to work. Thursday evening, with 2 days left before the preview, he was making final checks in the East Wing when he heard footsteps and turned to find Nora standing in the corridor holding 2 cups of coffee. Same as that first evening weeks ago. Same hallway, different light, warmer now because the windows were clean and the ceiling intact and the space had come back to itself. She handed him a cup without a word. He took it. They stood side by side looking at the restored corridor. The original wainscoting repaired, the plaster smooth. The floors refinished to something close to what they'd been in 1948. "It's real," she said quietly. Not to him specifically. Just to herself, to the hallway, to some part of her that needed to hear it stated. "It's real," he confirmed. She sipped her coffee. "Diana told me about the Renwick offer." He looked at her. "I asked her not to. She told me that too. She told me she was telling me anyway because she doesn't keep things from me that she thinks I need to know." Nora's voice was even. "She's been doing that for 4 years. I've never been able to stop her." "Smart woman," he said. "Infuriating woman." But the tone was the fond one. She turned slightly to look at him. "Are you going to take it?" He looked at the corridor. "I don't know yet." "It's a good offer." "Yes. Renwick does serious work. Historic Properties Division would be—" She stopped. "You'd be very good at it." "I know." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm not going to tell you not to take it," she said carefully. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not going to do that." "Okay. She stopped it again, started differently. "I want you to know that whatever you decide, what you did here for this estate, for the board meeting, for the situation with Victor, none of that changes. It's real, and it's done, and it was—" She paused. "It was the most important professional collaboration I've ever had. And I don't say that to put pressure on anything. I say it because it's true, and I'm trying to get better at saying true things out loud." He looked at her. She was looking at the corridor with that focused, straight-ahead quality she used when she was being honest about something difficult. "What else is true?" he said. She turned to look at him. The question had caught her. He waited. He wasn't going to make it easier. They'd known each other long enough for the honest version. "I think I'm going to miss you," she said. Simply, without the armor. Specifically, and not in a general way. "I think I'm going to miss the particular experience of working alongside someone who—" She stopped. "Who sees the whole thing, the bones of it. Not just what's in front of him, but what it could be." She met his eyes. I haven't had that. The hallway was quiet. Somewhere below them, Pete was calling something to his team, and the sound echoed up through the repaired floors and reminded them both that they weren't entirely alone in this building, which was maybe part of why they could say these things. I'm not going to make a decision about Renwick before the preview, he said. I want to see it finished first. She nodded. Accepted it. Didn't push. Nora, he said. She looked at him. The bones are good, he said. Here, everything that was built here is still worth something. He held her gaze. I'm not just talking about the estate. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her expression. Not the composed CEO, not the grieving daughter, not the woman carrying an entire company on her professional spine. Just a woman standing in a restored hallway, holding a cup of coffee, deciding to let something be true. I know, she said softly. They stood there for another moment. Then she straightened that small, characteristic adjustment, the armor clicking back into place, and said, The florist needs confirmation on the East Garden arrangement by 9 tomorrow morning. The East Garden is ready, he said. I know. I still need the confirmation. You'll have it by 8:30. She walked back toward the main building. He watched her go and drank his coffee and looked at the restored corridor and thought about his grandfather's tools in their case at home, and about Lily wanting to be a builder, and about the specific feeling of standing inside a thing you've helped bring back from the edge of lost. Friday was the final push. Ethan's crew ran 12 hours straight, and nobody complained because they could all feel what was happening, the specific momentum of a thing about to become what it was always supposed to be. The ballroom entrance mosaic was sealed and polished. The east wing was complete. The garden pavilion stood straight and true, with its original ironwork cleaned and reinstalled. The grand staircase railing caught the afternoon light exactly the way original ironwork catches light, which is better than anything that was made to replace it. At 4 in the afternoon, with the crew finishing their final cleanup, Ethan walked through the estate alone. He did this at the end of every significant project, a quiet walk through the finished space, not inspecting, not cataloging, just moving through it and letting himself experience what had been built. He'd learned early in his career that you owed a finished place that much. You owed it witness. He walked the east wing corridor. He stood in the ballroom entrance and looked at the mosaic floor. The blues and creams of it, restored to something his grandmother would have recognized and thought about. Margaret Tull saying she'd danced on it in 1952. 73 years ago. The floor remembered all of it, every celebration and every departure, and every ordinary Tuesday evening when nobody was watching. He walked through this garden pavilion and stood inside the frame looking out at the East Garden, which was finished and still and smelled like salt air and the particular clean smell of restored wood. He stood in the main entrance hall where the grand staircase rose its ironwork railing, catching the late afternoon light through the newly cleaned windows, and he looked up the length of it and thought about a man named Henry Whitfield, who built this place in 1948 for a woman he loved so that love could happen here. It had worked. It was still working. He went home. Lily was at the kitchen table with homework when he walked in, and she looked up and said, "You look different." "I'm tired." "You look tired but also different, like something finished." He sat down across from her. "A project finished today." "The big one with the lady?" "With the client, yes." She studied him. "Are you sad it's done?" He thought about it honestly the way he always did. "Not sad," he said. "More like when you finish a really good book and you close it and you sit there for a minute." She nodded seriously. She understood that. She read the way he did completely, and then all at once bereft when it ended. "What happens next?" she asked. "The preview event is tomorrow. Then we'll see." She considered this. "Dad?" "Are you going to see her again? After?" He looked at his daughter. She was watching him with those brown eyes that saw everything and filed it accurately, and had been doing so since she was 3 years old. "I don't know yet," he said. She nodded, went back to her homework. Then, without looking up, "I think you should." Yeah. She sounds like someone who needed help and let you help her, Lily said with the uncomplicated directness of a 7-year-old who had identified the relevant facts. That's hard for some people. He looked at his daughter for a long moment. When did you get so smart? I've always been this smart, she said. You just don't always pay attention. He laughed. It came from somewhere real. She grinned at her homework without looking up, and he made dinner, and they ate, and she told him about a disagreement she and Cassie had resolved about the horse as best friend question. They'd agreed that a horse could be a best friend, but only if the horse also considered you its best friend, which was the correct conclusion, and he told her so, and the evening was warm and ordinary, and exactly right. He went to bed thinking about what she'd said. She sounds like someone who needed help and let you help her. That's hard for some people. Lily had never met Nora Whitfield, but she'd assembled an accurate picture of her from the fragments of his days the way children assemble accurate pictures from fragments, because children listen to the things adults say when they think no one's paying particular attention. He fell asleep quickly, which told him something his conscious mind hadn't fully processed yet about where he'd landed. The investor preview was on a Saturday, and the Harrow Grand Estate was everything he'd said it would be. He wasn't officially part of the event. His crew had finished their work. The venue was handed over. He had no professional reason to be there. He was there anyway, standing near the garden entrance at the edge of things watching. 14 investors came through over the course of the afternoon. Nora guided most of them personally, moving through the estate with the fluency of someone who knew every room, every detail, every story. He watched her lead a group of 4 through the ballroom and stop at the mosaic entrance and say something that made all 4 of them crouch down to look at it more closely. And one of the women reached out and touched the tiles the way Nora had, the way Ethan had, the way the floor invited you to do, because it was evidence of someone's hands and someone's craft and something that had lasted. Diana worked the perimeter with the focus of a woman who had invested everything in the outcome and was not going to let a logistical detail interfere with it. She caught Ethan's eye once across the garden and gave him a nod that communicated everything it's working. Margaret Tull was there. She'd made the drive herself with a driver, and she moved through the estate with the particular authority of someone returning to a place they have claim on. Ethan saw her stand in the ballroom entrance for a long time, looking at the mosaic floor, and he watched something happen in her face that was too private to observe directly, so he looked away. By early evening, 3 investors had submitted formal letters of intent. Diana texted him from across the garden, 3LO is. Nora's trying not to cry. She's succeeding. Barely. He looked across the garden to where Nora was standing with 2 of the investors talking about projected event capacity. She looked exactly as composed as always. But he could see from the distance and the specific angle of knowing her, the thing underneath the composure that was not quite contained. He did not go to her. Not then. She was working, and she was very good at it, and she didn't need him to witness her success from close range. She needed to have it. The investors began departing around 7. The catering team cleared quietly. The florist's team removed the arrangements they'd used for the event. One by one, the lights in the main building were switched to the lower evening setting, and the estate settled into its end-of-day quiet. Ethan stayed. He wasn't sure why exactly. He told himself he wanted to make sure the crew's final work held up under the event conditions, which was a reason that had some truth in it. He walked the perimeter of the East Garden and checked the pavilion frame and satisfied himself that everything had held exactly as it should. Then he found himself standing in the garden near the south wall, where the old climbing roses had been cleared, back to make room for restored stone pathways, and he wasn't doing anything in particular. He heard footsteps on the pathway behind him. He turned. Nora was crossing the garden toward him alone. Her blazer was gone. Her heels were gone. She was in flat shoes, which he'd never seen her in, and it changed her height and the quality of her movement and made her seem more immediate, closer to the ground. She was carrying nothing. No phone, no clipboard, no folder. Just herself, moving through the garden in the early evening light toward him. She stopped a few feet away. 3 letters of intent, she said. I heard. Margaret Tull, pulled James Calloway aside before she left and told him that her late husband had always said this estate was the most beautiful property on the Atlantic coast. She paused. She said she agreed with him. She danced on that floor in 1952, Ethan said. She told me. Nora looked at the pavilion, his work, his crew's work, the thing they'd built. It held. It was always going to hold. She looked at him. You knew that. I know how to read a structure. He paused. Once you understand the bones, the rest is just work. She was quiet for a moment. The evening was settling and the salt air moving through the garden the way it did at this hour, carrying the smell of the ocean and the roses and the old stone of the estate walls. The Renwick offer, she said. I'm not taking it. She looked at him sharply. Ethan, I made the decision this afternoon, he said. While I was walking through the estate, I made it the way I make things slowly and then all at once. He held her gaze. I called Whitmore this afternoon. I told him I wasn't available for a Chicago position. She looked at him for a long moment. Because of Lily? Partly. Because of the work? Partly. She waited. She was getting better at waiting, he'd noticed. Better at letting silence do what it was for. Because of a specific reason I'm not ready to say out loud yet, he said. But I think you know what it is. She looked at him. Something moved through her face. Not the composed CEO, not the woman managing a crisis. The actual woman standing in the garden her grandfather built for love, deciding what to do with the truth that was in front of her. I might know, she said carefully. Then we're at the same place, he said. She looked away for a moment. Not evasion, just the space a person needs before they step across a threshold. Then she looked back at him and said, I'm not good at this. Which part? The part where I let something matter. She said it plainly with the specific honesty she'd been developing over the past weeks, the kind that arrived when she stopped performing competence and started just telling the truth. The part where I stopped managing it and just... She stopped. Let it be what it is, he said. She looked at him. Yes. He took a step toward her. Not sudden the way he did everything deliberately and clearly, so there was no ambiguity about what he meant. I'm not going anywhere, he said. I'm not taking a job in Chicago. I'm not walking away from Harrow Bay. And I'm not pretending that what happened here over the last 9 weeks was just professional. He paused. So you don't have to manage it. You just have to decide if you want it. She looked at him for a long, steady moment. The kind of moment that has weight, the kind that you remember later, not because of what was said, but because of what it felt like to be inside it. I want it, she said. He reached out and took her hand, not dramatically, just his hand around hers in the garden in the early evening, the way you take hold of something you intend to keep. She looked down at their hands, then up at him. And the smile arrived, the real one, the full one, the one that appeared when she stopped arguing with what she felt and let it happen. You know, he said, you'd make a great bride someday. She laughed. It came out surprised and genuine, and she shook her head at him slowly. We are not doing this. I was just making an observation. You were quoting yourself from 9 weeks ago. I remember saying it. I remember meaning it more than I let on. She looked at him with those sea glass eyes, steady and clear and completely unguarded for once, and she said, I would need a groom for that. I know, he said. I've been thinking about that problem. She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she turned toward the pavilion. His pavilion, their pavilion, the thing they'd built together from something broken into something that would hold, and she said, Walk with me. He walked with her. The estate settled around them as they went its old walls and restored floors and mosaic tiles and clean windows holding the light. The way a good building holds everything that happens inside it, with permanence, with patience, without letting go. 2 weeks later, Whitmore called Ethan again. This time, not about Renwick. About a property in Charleston that needed a restoration consultant for a 2-year project structured to allow remote work and a flexible schedule. No relocation. No Chicago. The kind of work that could coexist with Harrow Bay, with Lily's school schedule, with everything Ethan had decided mattered. He took it. Lily, when he told her, asked 3 logistical questions about whether it would change dinner times, whether he'd still be home for school pickup, and whether the lady from the job was involved. He answered the first 2 directly, and the third one indirectly, and she accepted all 3 answers with the same matter-of-fact equanimity and went back to her drawing. It was a horse. Unambiguously this time. She'd gotten better at horses. 3 months after the investor preview, the Harrow Grand Estate hosted its first major event under the restored venue, a wedding, which was the right thing. The original thing, the thing Henry Whitfield had built the estate for in 1948. 200 guests in the ballroom with the mosaic floor and the restored ironwork, and the chandelier that Pete had personally overseen returning to its position in the center of the ceiling. Ethan was there, not as a contractor, as a guest. Nora's guest, which was a different thing entirely. A thing that had been building since the afternoon in the East Wing corridor, when he'd sat down across from a woman crying quietly on a hallway floor, and decided that not going to her was simply not something he was willing to do. He stood near the ballroom entrance and watched the dancing, and Nora came to stand beside him, and they watched together without needing to say anything about it. Lily was there too, in a dress she'd chosen herself, that was the color of the ocean on a clear day, and she was dancing with Margaret Tull's granddaughter with the complete unself-conscious joy of a child who is exactly where she wants to be. And Ethan watched her, and felt the specific fullness of a man who has stopped believing his best years were behind him and discovered in the most concrete possible way that he was wrong. Margaret Tull appeared at his elbow. She looked at the ballroom, at the mosaic floor, at the couples dancing across what her friend had built for love to happen in. "Your work," she said. "The estate's work," he said. "I just helped it remember what it was." She looked at him with those clear, tireless eyes. "That's what good restoration is," she said. "You don't create anything. You remind something of itself." She paused. "You did that here. And I think you may have done it for more than the building." She moved away before he could answer, which was probably intentional. Nora took his hand. He looked at her. Her blazer was gone, her hair was down. She was wearing something that was not a CEO outfit, and she looked entirely herself in it, the self that lived underneath the competence and the grief and the years of carrying things alone. "She's right, you know," Nora said. "About which part?" "The part where you reminded something of itself." She looked at the ballroom, the dancing couples, the mosaic floor. "I forgot what this place was built for. I forgot it in the spreadsheets and the board meetings and the—" She stopped. "You walked in here 9 weeks ago, and the first thing you said was that the bones were good. They were good. I needed someone to see that." She looked at him. "I needed someone to look at something I'd stopped believing in and say no. It's still there. It's worth fighting for." He looked at her. "Nora." "Yes. That's not just the estate you're describing." She looked at him for a moment. Then she smiled, the real one, the full one, the one he'd watched arrive over 9 weeks from a shadow into the complete thing, and she said, "I know." The wedding band started something slow, and the ballroom filled with movement, and the chandelier threw light across the mosaic floor that Lily's father had found under 40 years of linoleum, and Ethan Cole, who had walked away from one life to build a better one and thought he was done building, understood finally that what he'd been doing all along wasn't walking away. He'd been clearing the ground for what came next. He took Nora Whitfield onto the dance floor of the estate her grandfather built for love, and they danced on the floor her grandmother had described for 50 years as walking on the ocean, and it was exactly that. Some things are built to last. Some things, when they are almost lost, find the right hands at the right moment and come back to themselves. And some people, broken carefully by different losses, discover in the wreckage of what they thought they'd buried that the most important thing was never gone. It was just waiting to be found by someone who knew how to look.